I could sit and listen to these stories all night, and we have 3 people to tell stories, so we have to keep them a little on the short side. But we will have a chance to have Q&A after this, and then the veterans will be around to talk to afterwards, and they can sign your books. Our next speaker is Paul Miller. He's from Elizabethtown. He was a paratrooper in the 101st Airborne. He jumped into France on D-Day. He was in Holland for Operation Market Garden, and if you're familiar with the movie A Bridge Too Far, that was about Operation Market Garden. He was in Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, helped liberate a concentration camp in Landesberg, and also helped liberate Hitler's wine cellar at Berchtesgaden, the Eagle's Nest. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Miller.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not used to speaking to a young class like this. I'm going to talk about World War II, and I'm sure none of you out there have any knowledge of it. In fact, you know, the history books today only has 2 pages in World War II. So I guess that's the reason they're calling us old-timers back to give a little bit of talk about World War II. And by the way, I wasn't in that same army that this gentleman was. I never seen Canadian bacon and eggs. I never seen anything like that. I never seen a USO show. I never seen any wax or waves or whatever else they were called. But I did have a little experience. I worked at the Harrisburg State Hospital when I came right out of the high school. Actually, my thoughts behind that, I wanted to be a surgeon, and I figured if I went there, I'd probably get the worst of the worst. And if I could take it there, why, I could probably go on. Unfortunately, the war broke out, and all the young people left. A lot of them was enlisting, and a lot of them was drafted, and I was probably one of the last young guys there. So I went down to enlist in the Army. The sergeant says, how old are you? I said, I'm old enough. He said, I can't take that. He said, I need your birth certificate, and I need an affidavit from your mother and father releasing you into the Army. So you better go home and get them. So I went home. That was out near Pittsburgh. First thing I ran into was my mother and father didn't particularly care for me to join the paratroops. And the second, I never had a birth certificate. In those days, the doctors usually made them out. Well, our old doctor forgot to make one out. So then I had to get 3 people who was there witnessing it to sign an affidavit that I was born. I left there and beat it back to Harrisburg, and I went in to see the recruiting sergeant, and he looked over the papers and he said, well, that looks good, just go pee in the bottle and you're in. The unfortunate thing is, I went over to New Cumberland and they put me in the uniform, such as it was. Too long, too short in some places, and when the shoes was too big. But they said that we'll work into it. Well, instead of sending me to the paratroops, they sent me down to Carlisle War Barracks. At that time, it was partially a medical facility. I was there not quite a day whenever they went over my records and sent me back to New Cumberland and said, you're due for the paratroops. I said, that's right. New Cumberland sent me to Walter Reed Hospital. That's because I had worked in a hospital before. Well, the first day I was there, they put me in whites. That's white pants, white shirt, and white coat. Put me up in the officers' ward. And I said, hey, I was supposed to go to the paratroops. The first sergeant says, we're working on it, Paul, we're working on it. Well, being low man on the totem pole, I was assigned to the officers' ward. Hardly got in there until the head nurse says, you take this big container and go into every room and dump the trash into it. And I thought, boy, this is the Army. This is what I enlisted for, dumping trash. But I did exactly like she told me, and it was sort of a horseshoe curve. And I went into every room, and there's all officers in there. Some of them was fast asleep. Some of them was drinking beer. And some of them was reading books and so on. When I got the whole way around, the last door was closed. I just tapped on it and opened it, walked in and went over and picked up the trash can and brought it out and emptied it in this big container and took it back in and hardly set it down until this old gentleman that was laying on the bed said, "Soldier, what are you doing?" I said, "The nurse told me to go into every room and empty his wastebasket." "Sir." He said, "Well, then you're following orders." I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "You won't have to do that anymore because I have a staff sergeant during the day and a buck sergeant at night that handles those little things for me." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, you won't have to do this anymore. You're dismissed." So I left. I hardly got outside of his door whenever the nurse was coming down there, her hands was going like that. And she said, "You didn't go in there, did you?" I said, "Yes, you told me to go in every room." "You know who's in there?" I said, "Some old man laying on a bed." He said, "You know who it is?" I said, "No, ma'am." He said, "That's General Blackjack Pershing." So I'm one of the few people who in here that has ever talked to Blackjack Pershing, believe me. After 2 months at the Walter Reed Hospital and going in every day asking him if my transfer has been through, I always got, "We're working on it." So I sat down and I wrote a letter to the commanding general of the paratroops at Fort Benning, Georgia, asking them to be transferred to his command. Within 2 weeks, my major got a letter telling him that he will transfer me to his command if I could pass the physical. I learned then about the chain of command. You don't write over or you don't talk back to anybody that's a little bit higher than you in rank. Well, a major called me in and he informed me of this. And whenever he was done, I realized that if I didn't pass that physical, I would be digging foxholes right down through the concrete at Walter Reed Hospital. Fortunately, or unfortunately, he notified the doctors that was giving physicals that I was to be given one real good. And believe me, when I come out of there, I knew whether I had dandruff or flat feet and anything in between. But they couldn't find anything, so the next day the orders was cut and I was on my way to Toccoa, Georgia, where the paratroops train. We got on the train and we got to Toccoa, crawled off of the train and onto a big old truck and started up onto the mountain where the camp was. The first thing I noticed, the first thing that we passed was a casket company, and I thought, my God, they're getting them pretty close. Anyhow, we got up there and we started training. I have never trained like that in my life, and I hope I never have to do it again. We ran a mountain 3 miles high every day, except Sunday. Of course, if you goofed off, you did it on Sunday, too. That was 3 miles up and 3 miles down every day. Then you run an obstacle course. Then you had hand-to-hand combat. And let me tell you this, that was the dirtiest fighting that I ever come through in my life. There's nothing that they couldn't teach you that you made your back shiver a little bit. In some places you had between 5 and 7 ways to kill a man just with your hands. And that was just one of the little things. And we got taught every type of a gun, every type of a mortar, anything like that. It was quite hard. I'll give you an example. 5,000 enlisted men applied to go into parachute training with a 506. 1,725 got their wings. 500 officers applied, 175 got their wings. So you were weeded out. If you failed to run the mountain, if you stopped, if you did anything that you should be physical training, you were out. My closest buddy had the last digit of his finger off. He wasn't even allowed to come in. He was transferred to the infantry and later on killed over in the Far East. After about 3 months of training, and this was physical training right down the line, you couldn't drop out. One of the tests was that you had to have 100 points and physical. In other words, you got a point for every push-up you did. You got a point for every chin you could do. And a few people don't know how you pull yourself up and chin. You got so many points for running the obstacle course within a certain time. All these things, and you had to do 100 points or you were out. Fortunately, there was very few people by that time that couldn't do this because it was very rigorous training. This was between the 25, 10, 15, 25-mile hikes with full packs. Our last one, whenever we left Camp Toccoa to go down to Fort Benning, Georgia, we marched 115 miles in 3 days. Well, you figure out the mileage per day. Not one man dropped out of that thing, and I seen men with the bottom of their feet was one solid blister. They put their boots on the next day and walked till the next night. You got down there and you got physical training again. Everywhere you went, it was double time. You learn how to pack your own parachute. So after we learned how to pack our first parachute, they took us up and told us, you're going to jump today. You jumped at around 1,500 feet. And you get up there and you look down, it's a good 1,500 feet. It looks further than that, to be honest with you. Well, they put you in the string, and as you moved into the door, you grabbed both hands, and whenever the jump master said go, you pushed yourself out, made a turn, and hoped your chute would open. And it did. I'm here. The second and third time was beautiful. After I jumped the third time, we had to go in and repack our chutes for the fourth jump. Well, that was in the evening, and for some reason or other, we had a blackout. The whole camp went blackout. Well, the sergeant in charge says, if you don't pack your chute, you don't jump. Well, I packed my chute, and I jumped it the next day. And whenever I went out the door, I felt the jar that the chute opened, so I wasn't very much concerned. But as I looked around, everybody was going up. And I thought, my God, they have an awful big updraft around here. And I looked up, and here was my chute, lines over the canopy, and 5 balloon panels. And I was coming down like a bat out of you-know-what. And sure enough, the old story there is, if you're having trouble, you'll see the ambulance coming. And I looked down, and sure, the ambulance was coming. But right behind him was the officer in the Jeep. Well, I was fortunate. I had a good back, wind to the back, and I made a perfect tumble right through a mud puddle. And I sort of worked myself around a little bit, and by that time, the officer was there, and he said, "Soldier, are you hurt?" And I said, "I don't think so, sir." He said, "Stand up." And I stood up. He said, "You feel okay?" I said, "Yeah." Then he gave me hell for packing my chute wrong. Well, on the 5th jump, we got our wings. And after you get your wings, why, you bloused your pants onto your boots. And you could strut a little bit because you did something that a lot of people never thought about doing. And I guess I was just like the rest of them. I was a little bit cocky too. Anyhow, we went through a bunch of maneuvers. One place we went into was Camp McCall, North Carolina, and it was in April. And if you know anything about North Carolina, it's a little bit swampy. In fact, a good bit of it's swampy. We set up camp there, and the colonel came around, and I was working with demolition at the time. And the colonel said, "You see that swamp out there? All those stumps, I want all those stumps blown out of there so the men can have a swimming pool here." "Yes, sir." So we donned on our trunks, and we took TNT and the wires out and set them under these stumps. We had about 6 of them the first time. We got back out of the water, and we touched off the thing, and the stumps went up in the air, and the roots went everywhere. And some of them didn't look like good roots, but whenever we went back in and we started looking around here, it was cottonmouth moccasins. They go down underneath these roots during the winter time and sort of winterize down there. Well, we took care of the ones that we could. Most of them was killed. There were a few of them there that was sort of stunned, but we took care of that. But the funny part of it was, after we was done clearing all those stumps, nobody wanted to go in and use the swimming pool. Sometime during that, I was sent away. I was in the medical detachment. So my major said, Paul, I want you to go down to Lawson General Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, and I want you to study surgery. Well, I couldn't say no. He's the boss. So I went down, and that's what I did. I studied meatball surgery for about 2 months. And I seem to tell you it was meatball surgery. But I come back and I helped the fellows, other men that didn't know anything about it. And we learned, we shared everything. By that time, it was time to go. So we boarded our train and we headed for Camp Shanks. That was in New York City. That was the port of embarkation. Well, I was then the chief surgical technician for the regiment, and I was in charge of all the medical supplies. When I climbed on the train, I had 2 gallons of pure ethyl alcohol. That's 180 proof. And we always ate K rations. And in K rations, they had this powdered lemonade. So the two went pretty much together. And we didn't care whether we got the keg stamps or not. Whenever we got off of the train, it didn't matter much to any of it. But we were there just for a few days. We were ordered onto the boats, and we got on the boats, and we started across in convoy. Now in convoy, there's no radios at all, because they're afraid German submarines will pick up the radios and they can beam in on you. So all they had the flags with some of these guys could flag, and then they had the lights that flashed on and off. Well, unfortunately, we ran into a fog one night. And every so often, this thing would change. They'd change course by the time. Well, out of the fog one morning, here comes this, we were going this way, and we looked out, and here comes a ship this way. And we knew they were going to hit. There was no way that you could get it. They were just going like that. Well, bells started to ring, and lights started to flash, and as this boat was coming, both one like that there, and the one come up, I thought I could shake hands with that man in the other boat. But the water came up between us, and we all got drowned almost. But anyhow, the boat didn't hit. We went on through to England. We got off in England, and we started training again. We did more parachute jumps over there. The time came, we were supposed to get on the planes to jump into Normandy. We got in the planes. We were all hooked up, everything. Each one of us probably weighed anywhere from 350 to 400 pounds. That's the equipment you had plus your weight. Well, you could hardly walk, to be honest with you. You had to be pushed up in the plane. You couldn't crawl up. Well, the motors were running and everything else, and all of a sudden the plane shut down. They told us to get off. The invasion was canceled. Well, nothing we could do. We got off and we went back into the area. No one was allowed in or out. The next day we got orders to go back on the plane. This time we took off. We flew across the English Channel and come in the back way to Normandy. And we were jumping, well, we should have been jumping something like 800 feet. Some of the pilots got a little scared. They were flying in formation. And when we hit the beach, you can say all hell broke loose. All the red and green tracers coming up and the bursts of flag everywhere. We heard it going through the plane. It would go ping, 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 ping. And it was a little scary, to be honest with you. And then we got the orders to jump. But in the meantime, a few of these pilots got scared. And get out of the flak, they started to come down. And we estimated it was between 350 and 300 feet when the green light went on and we had to jump. Now at 300 feet, your chute just about opens whenever your feet hit the ground. The propellers was going as fast as they could go. Some of us, whenever we went out the door, almost every equipment that we had on was blown right off of us. If some of you people here in Hershey might know Major Winters. Major Winters hit the ground with nothing more than his trench knife in his boot. Everything else was gone. Men lost their rifles, they lost their bazookas, they lost everything. They just hit the ground with their chute on. Anyhow, instead of landing in a field where the pathfinders, that's the people who come in and about 2 hours ahead of time, and they'll set up a signal. The planes will come right in, and that's where you jump, right where that signal is. Unfortunately, whenever they broke formation, they scattered us over 30 miles of the Normandy Peninsula. And some of that was good, in a way, because the first Germans that we captured and interrogated, they wanted to know why we were 24 hours late. And had we jumped there and jumped on that field, I think we'd have been annihilated. So that was one good thing about what happened. The first person I ran across had a broken leg. Now I'm talking about 1:30 in the morning. You had to do everything by feel. You wouldn't dare turn a flashlight on, because that would have been a perfect place to be shot. So you did everything by feel. So I set his leg the best I could, wrapped him up in his parachute. It was a man I worked with at the Harrisburg State Hospital. I never knew that he was in the paratroops, let alone in the Pathfinders. You meet some, that's the reason I never went astray with my wife, because I knew she'd know it before I got home. The second person I come across was a German soldier. He was wounded high up in the shoulder. Well, you got to think real quick. In my book, he was a human being, and he was hurt, he was injured, so I took care of him. I cut his clothes away here, got the wound cleaned up, put salt on it, and bandaged it up. And just as I was finishing up, I heard click. And I thought, well, that's one of our boys. Well, unfortunately, the Germans have a bolt-action rifle. It went click, 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 click. Well, the little toy that they gave us to identify each other, whenever you hit the ground and somebody was in front of you, went, and if he would, that was a friend. And it took us about 3 or 4 hours to realize that the Germans, whenever they opened their gun, their bolt-action guns, it went like this, and when they threw it forward, it went like this. So, by the way, these were the little things that they gave us to identify each other. As I just finishing up on this German soldier, I heard this click. And it didn't sound right. And I turned around, and here was a German soldier. He had his gun right on me. And I thought, oh, hell, my war's over right now. And at that time, I wasn't shaken with patriotism. Believe me, I just had the hell scared out of me. This German soldier that I had taken care of started to talk, and he talked pretty fast, and he talked fairly loud. And apparently he must have said something that I took care of him, or go get me help, or whatever it was. I don't understand German. But the man that had the gun on me turned around and left. He went that way, and I went that way. And from there on out, my job was taking care of wounded. And we had a lot. General Eisenhower and his staff estimated that the airborne people would have about an 82% casualty on the jump into Normandy. They didn't miss it by far. We left there about 31 days later and come back to England to resupply ourselves and get men who want to be paratroopers. We went out and anybody that wanted to be a paratrooper, we took him back and took him up in a plane, and if he jumped 5 times, he was a paratrooper. He won his wings. That was good. They filled our ranks. but believe me, they didn't have the physical training that we had. And that's what most of us come through, because we could keep up. We could do things that most of the other men couldn't, and they lost. We had men that I never even got to know their names. They was there one day and they were gone the next. See, he cuts me off, but he lets everybody else. Anyhow, it was a good thing. I'm going back on the 12th of this month. I'm going to retrace the same things that I'm going to retrace the same steps that I went. Not the same things that we did. But I'm not going to kick any kids over there either.
I hate to be the bad guy, the timekeeper here, really, because like I said, I could listen to these gentlemen all night. I should, for the PCN audience out there, I should put in a little commercial for this book. The gentlemen you're listening to tonight, their stories are included in this book, World War II in Their Own Words, published by Stackpole Books, available in any bookstore or on PCNTV.com. And if you want to pick up a copy here in the room,